Hey everybody, welcome back to the 26th episode of the PictureMonk podcast. As many of you may know, I am Jordan from PictureMonk.com. You probably should know that because I try to say it at the beginning of every podcast. But for the 26th episode, for this latest episode, you might have seen by the title that it's titled "Somebody Hates Me," and so you'll kind of get the gist of what that means in a minute. But mainly for this podcast, I want to go over 5 questions that I had in past weeks for the podcast. I haven't been talking about the questions much because I've had other topics that I've wanted to discuss. So I do have a lot of questions that have come in, so I'll probably be splitting them up between this podcast and next week's podcast. So if you don't hear your question, it'll probably be answered in next week's podcast. So let's go ahead and get into the reason why I talked about, or I titled this episode "Somebody Hates Me," and it's just something. I started the PictureMonk site probably back in August of last year, so I'm not even a year into it. And shortly after that, after getting a bunch of articles on there as much as I could, I decided to start this podcast and also roll out a YouTube channel. And all the social media accounts that go with, running a photography blog like this. And I finally got my first bit of hate mail. So this will be fun to read. I was actually just waiting for the time that I got my first bit of hate mail, my first person that didn't like anything that I said, and I'll read the email here in just a second so you can hear what this one person said. But it doesn't affect me at all. It's kind of like when somebody tells you they don't like your taste in music, or they don't like that you do this certain thing or whatever. That's their thing. That's their opinion. You can't please everybody in the world. So people just get nasty sometimes. And so this guy, I assume it's a guy. His name is Don F. He didn't leave his last name, which is fine. But he wrote me an email that was pretty harsh. So I'll go ahead and read it right now. You can kind of hear what he said. So basically started off, I have been listening to your podcast for a while, and it seems you don't really know what you were talking about. Just checked your portfolio, and it has to be some of the worst real estate photos I have ever seen in a long time. Okay, I've ever seen in a long time doesn't really make any sense, but I'll continue reading. All of the angles are off, and it seems like all you do is apply your crappy presets to them, and that's it. You do no real editing. Also, your YouTube videos are extremely boring, and you don't give any good information about anything. I am unsubscribing and will listen to the other podcasts that give useful information. If you want me as a listener, up your game and actually become a photographer. And like I said, that was Don F. in Minnesota. So, Don, if you are by chance still subscribed and still listening, just to see if I would read your email, I did. I gave you your little 15 minutes. So basically, I kind of want to just go head on into this and just say thank you for looking at my portfolio. You gave your opinion on your stuff. I do wish if you consider yourself a photographer, which anybody can call themselves a photographer. If you got a camera and you take a picture, you're a photographer in some way, shape, or fashion. I do wish you would have left your other than your name. I wish you would have left your contact information, maybe an email, maybe a website that I could go to see any stuff of yours, or anything like that, because I obviously I want you as a listener. I don't want that attitude that you brought to the conversation, but I do want you as a listener. I want a lot of people to listen to the podcast. But again, can't please everybody. If you feel my stuff is boring, I apologize. There's tons of other photographers out there, people that have blogs and everything, and they do a lot of good stuff. So feel free to go watch them. Doesn't bother me at all. I really don't appreciate you calling my presets crappy. They're not really that crappy. And you spelled crappy with 3 P's, but whatever you do. if you're still listening, I apologize. I'm sorry you feel that way. But losing one of you guys is not gonna make me not sleep at night, especially some guy with an attitude like this. So, thank you, Don, for listening for the amount that you did, and maybe we'll listen to you, or we'll hear you listen another time. So, let's go and get into some of the questions for those of you who are listening, still. So apparently I'm losing a lot of people. For those of you who are listening, let's go and get into the questions that were submitted. So this might be sort of a smaller podcast, a lighter podcast, just because I don't have any news articles or anything like that. I just kind of wanted to roll into these questions and read the hate mail. So, but let's go and get in the first question, and it kind of has to do with the newest release of Lightroom. I don't have any names, unless the form didn't pull in the names. I don't have any names. I might have to check that in just a second. But so the first question is, what are your thoughts about Lightroom CC so far? Have you used it much, and should I upgrade from Lightroom 5? Yeah, if you have Lightroom CC, if you have the subscription version of Lightroom, which I would assume you do, if you have that, I would definitely upgrade. Lightroom CC does have its faults. There are still some bugs that need to be worked out. I have used it a lot. I have been playing with a bunch of the new features. The two main features, obviously, you've probably heard them, tons by now. The HDR mode and the panorama mode built in to Lightroom, so you don't have to go into Photoshop. I've been playing around with those. It works very well. There is one thing. I have a 2010 iMac, and apparently the graphics card. See what Lightroom did was they pushed a bunch of the processing power onto the GPU of the computer instead of the CPU, so it would free up more resources on the computer. But depending on what GPU graphics processing unit, not central processing unit, but if you have, depending on the GPU that you have, it may not be as compatible as newer models of a graphics card. So by default, in the preferences of Lightroom, the use GPU option is selected to use that. So whenever I would open up my Lightroom, I would, apply a preset, or, even change something as simple as the exposure, and Lightroom would shut down completely. So I would reopen it, do the same thing, and it would shut down again. I would try another photo, do the same thing, it would shut down again. It just kept shutting down. It was basically unusable. And so I was doing a little research, and I found that if you uncheck the use GPU option, if you see a bunch of crashes happening, if you uncheck that, you'll probably be fixed. So I unchecked that about a week ago, and I haven't had any crashes at all. It's not running as fast as it probably would have if I had a GPU that was supported on my machine. Granted, it's 10 years old. 5 years old. I can't do math. But it, I'm not getting the performance, but still, it's not that bad. It's probably running like Lightroom 5 did. So if you are experiencing issues, check that feature and just see if that does work out for you. But to answer your question, I definitely would upgrade. There are some really cool features that were added, and it makes doing a bunch of stuff that you would have to go into Photoshop to do, it makes those really, really easy. So yes, if that was your question, I definitely would upgrade if you have the subscription model. If you don't have the subscription model, and you just have Lightroom 5 that you bought outright, definitely think about moving into the subscription model. It's only $10 a month or $9.99 a month, and you get Lightroom, all upgraded versions of Lightroom, and all upgraded units of Photoshop in the subscription. So you're constantly getting the good latest update, and it definitely works out well. And you always see those videos online, or see those tweets that Lightroom was released and something else was released, and you're like, well, crap, I can't get the coolest version now. Everybody else has got these coolest versions, but I can't do that. So yeah, I would definitely upgrade if you haven't already. So let's go and move on to the next question. All right, the next question is, next week I'm going to be taking my first product photos of jewelry for a friend and wanted to know if you had any tips. I don't really do a lot of product photography. I did when I was going through school to do the graphic design stuff. You have to do a lot of photography in there. So I had to do a couple bits of photography then, but never any jewelry stuff. If I had a couple tips, I guess it'd probably be some of the basic stuff. It would be if you can get a hold of a macro lens, that would probably work out really good for you, so you can get the up close detail of the jewelry, whether it be necklaces, rings, stuff like that. You'll probably get really good detail out of that if you can get a good macro lens. If you don't have the macro lens as an option, you could also get extension tubes that are online and Amazon. Depending on what kind you get, I have the cheap, like $5 extension tubes. It's like a off brand of something, which they work out great. You can actually get in really close with them. However, you probably have to do focus stacking because even though your distance isn't that far away from the front of the jewelry to the back of the jewelry, you probably have to do focus stacking, which I probably should make a tutorial on that. Dawn won't watch it, but I'll probably have to make a tutorial on that. It basically have to do focus stacking because the aperture is so small. Number wise, it's going to be massive to where you're not going to get a lot of depth of field. So you could try that. If you have time to pick up a couple cheap extension tubes, do that. You could also try, if it gets really bad, you could also just take your lens off of the camera body and flip it around and take a picture that way. That kind of converts it to a macro lens. If you just flip the camera lens around, you have to hold it up, it won't be able to lock onto your camera, and you don't have any controls over aperture. But if you just flip it around and hold it up to your camera, you can get a macro mode, sort of say. It's not the greatest option. It's probably not going to be too clear, or as clear as a macro lens would be. But it definitely will give you up close detail on certain stuff. If all that doesn't work, you're probably just gonna have to crop and try to get some good close up detail. Make sure you get a good flash unit to try to pop some light in there and get some reflections. You can even bounce it off of a wall. And again, you don't need a lot of space when you do jewelry for product photography. You basically can just set it up on a stand and everything, and just put a black background behind it, and then and pop the flash to get some reflections. And then in post, if they want a pure black background or pure white background, if you're getting a black background, just decrease the blacks a little bit in post. Same thing if you put like a white sheet or a white piece of cardboard or something like that behind it, just increase the whites and it'll blow that out and get that sort of professional look. But that's the only tips I can give you. If it's for a friend, see if they can get you some extended time with that stuff so you can play around and get the best stuff. Or if you have some jewelry you can test out and play with before you start shooting the actual stuff, then I would definitely try that out. So sorry I don't have any like definite tips, but yeah, just it's kind of basic stuff. So hope that answers your question, and feel free to write back and let me know how that goes. I'd like to hear how the images went and see the images if possible. Can't talk tonight. So let's get into the third question. All right, the third question, it says real estate photography question, period. How do you take photos of bathrooms and not get yourself in the photos? I am just trying to not have to remove myself in Photoshop since I'm not good at all. I assume you're not good at all in Photoshop. That's a tricky one. The only methods that I've been able to use is if you have to shoot straight on at a mirror to get maybe the tub and the sink and the toilet and stuff like that all in one shot, and you have to shoot a mirror, put your camera on a tripod, obviously, and then set your timer to the 10-second timer, and compose your shot, get all your settings right, and then just click the shutter and run out of the room. So that way if you do have to take out something in the mirror, it's just going to be a camera, and that usually is easier to take out than a camera plus a person. That's what I would recommend. That's what I've had to do a couple times, because I definitely had to do straight on shots, and it's just not fun doing that. Another way of doing it is the Photoshop way, as far as basically just taking the straight on shot again as an example. You can actually Google the word mirror and in Google Images and find like a mirror off of like a product shoot, which basically all that is like a bunch of linear gradients that are just like 45-degree angles to mimic how a mirror would look. And you can put that over the mirror. It won't be ideal. It'll probably look like crap, but it won't be. It'll be better if you're not really too good at taking yourself out of shots in Photoshop. The other thing is if you got a really good wide angle lens that you got good detail with, you could actually get in the tub. I'm using an example of what I had to shoot before. And it's basically just the tub on the left, sink in the middle, toilet on the right. And what I had to do is get in the tub, get low, about counter level, and then I was able to get the tub in the shot with the sink and the toilet. You don't get all of the shower or the tub in the sink, but that definitely portrays to the person looking at the images that there is a tub there, obviously. So that's the only other techniques I could have. It's kind of like whenever there's a mirror around, you're going to probably have to Photoshop out something. So hope that answers your question. You could probably also ask Don from Minnesota. You can ask him about that, because he seems to know a lot about real estate photography. So try to get in touch with him as well. I'm gonna hate on Don this whole episode. All right, question number 4. Let's see. I never heard you talk about flash photography. Do you use it often? And if you do you have any tips for starting out? Yeah, I don't use a whole lot of flash. I do have a new flash unit that I did buy. It's the Yongnuo YN562, I think. Yeah, I bought that, and I've used it a couple times. I really do like it. It's finally nice to have a semi-automatic flash. It's not a TTL flash, but yeah, it's a good flash. I don't really use flash a lot, just to be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about flash units. I mean, I know that, yeah, you can pop a flash and you can zoom it into a certain length, and you set the flash to the same shutter speed that you're using, that sort of thing. I know all of that, but I don't really know much about it. I'm not a flash wizard. I can get my camera, I can get my flash off the camera and that sort of thing and play around with it there. But, the stuff that I like to shoot doesn't really require flash, minus the real estate stuff, which then I just try to use natural light if I can, just because of the time constraints. I got to get in there and, take the photos and get out. If I am using flash for real estate stuff, then most of the time it's just bounced off the ceiling, and that just means pointing the flash directly up to the ceiling, so that when you take the light hits the ceiling and spreads out through the whole room, giving you a little better coverage of light, that sort of thing. So I don't really have too many tips. It's basically just trial and error for flash. There are, obviously there's flash videos on YouTube, which you can probably go ahead and Google some of those. I don't have any of those, just again because I don't use a lot of flash, and I wouldn't really consider myself an expert at it. So I'm not gonna tell anybody how to use it if I don't know how to use it. So, but yeah, it's basically just playing around. Just get a whole bunch of AA batteries and just play around with your flash. Just use it up, and just keep going with it and see what kind of shots it gives you. I would recommend, if you pop a flash, if you're testing it out, pop a flash and you understand you think it's too bright, don't mess with your shutter speed as much. Always control the light with your aperture and your ISO. If you can lower your ISO and get better lighting that way, lower it and get a more neutral setting, do it that way. But yeah, never change your shutter speed in regards to that, because that will mess up a bunch of stuff. And it won't give you as good as results as messing with your aperture and ISO. I found that out a little bit. And again, some of these flashes, unless you get, I don't remember what it's called, but unless you get, those ones that do the pulsing to give you higher shutter speeds, most of the flashes top out at a 1/200th of a second, and you can't really get any good results that way, because the shutter, when you take a shot with the flash and the shutter speed like at 1/500th of a second, the curtain doesn't have enough time to move, so you're going to get a black bar in your photos. So again, I don't really have any major tips, just because, again, I don't know how to use them as well as I would like to. But yeah, I would definitely test that out and just play around with it. That's all photography is trial and error. I mean, you can learn from a lot of people, but yeah, you're going to learn better if you can just play around with it and test it out yourself. All right, and the last question is, it says, "Hi, Monk. I am a 17-year-old senior in high school, and I want to go to college for graphic design. I heard that you okay, I guess it means I heard that you went to graphic design school in an old podcast. How was your experience, and did you do a lot of photography?" I kind of touched on this a little bit with the product photography question. Yes, I did go to graphic design school at a local community college. They have a really good program there. You get instructors that really do care how your stuff comes out and how how much you're learning. They really do care about that stuff. And yes, one of the requirements was to do basically, I think it's 3 photography classes in your second year, because I just went for the associates program. You have to do a beginner sort of photography where it teaches you how to do the panning techniques. That gives you the basics of photography, obviously, for some people who don't know. Gives you foreground interest, background interest, mid-ground interest is what they called it, but it's basically just overall interest. Composition techniques, they give you all that stuff. It's the basic stuff in that class. The next class was the fun one, where you get to do a lot of studio stuff, which is cool because you get to play with all the cool equipment in there. The big flash units. You can set up all the cool backgrounds and all that kind of stuff, and play with reflective tops and everything. So you get to do that. And then I think in that class they taught you how to use all the stuff, and then they just said, here's what we want you to shoot, and just do it. So that requires you to go out and get props for the stuff. They do have a couple props there, but you have to go out and get the props you needed. And for example, one of those would be they wanted a product shot of a candy, and so you had to do a really cool product shot of a candy. So I chose to do Skittles, because I do love Skittles. It's just a big ball of sugar. And so my idea for that was just to have my friend there, and him hold out his hands, and someone dump the Skittles into his hand. And so I used the light, the flash units to flash and freeze the Skittles from jumping off of his hand. And you have to have good composition so it can be an advertisement, that sort of thing. And there's a bunch of other product stuff. I do wine bottles and all that kind of stuff. But then the third class was kind of like a do it yourself thing. You basically had to come up with 10 images for a portfolio, a photography portfolio. So you had to choose your theme. You never really met in a class. You just basically met with your instructor. Every school is going to be different, but I'm just telling you how my experience was. Met with an instructor, and you talked through the photo that you took that week. So you had to take one photo every week, and so you had to talk with them about it and kind of go along with that theme. And so a lot of people were choosing like abandoned stuff or flowers or stuff like that, but I chose to do a technique for my portfolio, and that was a slow shutter speed technique. I want to do long exposure photography, so all of my photos were taken using long exposures. So that really turned out pretty well. So, but that's just my experience. Yes, when you at least in my program, you did have to do a lot of photography, and it was just a really good experience. And it was, I knew a lot going in because I was kind of self-taught going in, but they definitely did teach you a lot of stuff. So, thank you for that question, and again, congratulations on almost getting out of high school. That's a good thing. If you're Here in the States, yeah, you're getting close to being out of high school. So hope you get into a good program. I don't know where you live, but yeah, I hope you get into a good program, and I'm sure you'll do fine. All right, and before I end out this this episode, I did go back real quick. I paused the podcast for a second. I did go back real quick and was able to find the names for these. So I want to give these guys recognition here for sending in questions as a thank you. So the Lightroom question, the first one was from Rachel Stevens. The next one for the jewelry question was from Daniel Forst. I think I'm saying that right. Forst. The real estate question for the bathrooms, that was Tom Helms. Let's see. The flash photography question, Sam L. I didn't get a full last name, but L is the initial. And then the 17-year-old senior, that was Jackson Harper. So I had to write those down to make sure I gave you guys credit. So thanks for sending in questions. Thanks for rating the podcast. Thanks for listening every week. I say that all the time, and I know you guys hate it. Probably have already closed out the episode by now. But if you are still listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for rating the podcast. It really helps out the podcast a lot, and I do appreciate it. Thank you for everything. Pretty much. That's it. Yeah. So head on over to PictureMonk.com for a bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to put much as far as show notes go for this episode. If you do want to see some of the stuff talked about that was on here, I may pop the questions on there, but I didn't really give any news articles, so there's not much to see. But just head over to PictureMonk.com and just check out the site if you haven't checked it out in a while. And subscribe on the social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. And that's about it. Oh, before I go, I did forget. I was recording this on Periscope, on the Periscope app. I talked about this in a couple weeks episodes ago. So if you ever want to listen to this live, because I recorded on Saturday nights, if you ever want to listen to this live, get the Periscope app and find me on there and friend me, and you'll get notified whenever I do this. So I'm just going to stop it now. And you know, it stays up there for 24 hours after I record it. So I'm gonna stop rambling. But yeah, okay. See you later, guys. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you guys next week.